In about 10 minutes, we're going to see the 1964 documentary John F. Kennedy, Years of Lightning, Days of Drums. But first, we're going to speak with Pepperdine University Senior Fellow Bruce Herschensohn, who's also the writer, director, and music composer of the 1964 film. Bruce Herschensohn, take us back to 1964. How did this project come about?
It came about in 1963. It came about on November the 22nd of 1963 when the president was assassinated. I was leaving D.C. to go to New York on the first leg of a trip around the world to write a film on refugees from communism. And on the plane, a woman was crying. I asked if she was okay. She said the president was killed. And I said, that can't be. I just came from the United States Information Agency, and I certainly would have known it. She said, no, he was killed. Anyway, I felt that I said, I don't believe that's true. Maybe someone took a shot or something, but he wasn't killed. Looked out the window as we landed at Idlewild Airport, which today is called JFK, and the flag was at half-staff. And to just tell you how the brain works on a day like that, I assumed that whoever lowered that flag to half-staff heard the same outrageous rumor that the lady had told me about. When I came to the terminal, I recognized it was true. There were little TV sets on the counters of the airlines. I called D.C., asked if there was anything I could do. The answer was yes, come back. And so I did.
So you were doing work for the U.S. Information Agency at the time?
Yes, I was.
Not
as an employee, but as a contractor. I was making movies.
And the documentary eventually was done by the Information Agency. What was their purpose in the 1960s?
I'll just start with what was asked of me to do, to direct the days up to and including the funeral. There was those 4 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, direct and shoot. And then we'll make some decisions about what we'll do. And in the meantime, asked people from the embassies around the world to take films of the commemorations that are going on in their city that they host. And then when those 4 days were done, and I did exactly as was stated, wanted a film on President Johnson immediately, and for the next month, I made a film on President Johnson, and then went back to this and asked if we could make this a feature, and the answer was yes, and I worked on it for the next year.
And there's a pretty remarkable narrator in the film that people will notice. Tell us about that.
Gregory Peck. Gregory Peck did the narrative for the film on President Johnson, and also Years of Lightning, Day of Drums. And on President Johnson, the reason that a film was wanted on President Johnson immediately, all the embassies and consulates around the world had on President Johnson, of course he was vice president, was a barbecue in Texas. That's all they had, nothing else. So immediately set out to make a film on President Johnson.
Now, on the Years of Lightning film, what was the reaction to it by the public, and why did it take a congressional resolution of some sort regarding this film?
By law, films made for the United States Information Agency were not allowed to be screened in the United States except for educational purposes, because they could be used for political purposes. Remember this, when the president was killed, this was 1963, the end of 63, November the 22nd, and 1964 was going to be an election. What if we did a film and it was shown at election time, USA? That could be using taxpayers' money for partisan political use. And that was taboo, and I think it was correct to be taboo, because, of course, that could be done. The idea was to do this for overseas release. That's the business of the United States Information Agency. So it took a congressional act, and it was nonpartisan, that allowed it to be screened in the United States.
What kind of places would screen it? Typical movie houses?
Oh, sure. Regular movie houses, yeah. And around the world, it had already been screened in movie houses, U.S. embassies, television in the countries that had it, and a lot of countries didn't. Or hanging up on a sheet between two trees in some village.
Do you ever get any feedback on how many people, particularly in the United States, saw this film on its first run?
No, I haven't. I do not know. I know it was there was a premiere we had in both in D.C. and in New York.
And the film now has been remastered and released in conjunction with the 50th anniversary of the assassination. Were you part of that project, the remastering project?
Only in viewing it to see if it was comparable to what it was like the day it was done, and boy, I gotta say, it was comparable to the day it was done. They did a magnificent job, really a magnificent job in restoring it to the way it was, because in time that Eastman color faded, or I shouldn't even use the word faded, turned magenta. And boy, I always got a little bit certainly unhappy after seeing a print made in those days, and I didn't know it could be restored in the way that it was. It's absolutely marvelous.
Professor Herschensohn, you did films on John F. Kennedy, on Lyndon Johnson, yet later you went to work for President Nixon, and then again
Right.
for President Reagan. How did your political views evolve over the years?
They didn't evolve. They stayed the same. I was always a very conservative Republican. When the president was killed, that's the end of partisanship. And I had gone also on the trip that he made to Europe earlier in '63 in June, particularly the 26th of June, which was the speech in Berlin, the Ich bin ein Berliner speech.
As a free man, I take pride in the words, Ich bin ein Berliner.
But I was always a conservative Republican. There is no partisanship. In that time, I don't know of any partisan act by anyone. And my friends were all, not all, but certainly most of them were conservative Republicans.
The John F. Kennedy film, The Years of Lightning, Days of Drums, makes the late president almost saint-like in its portrayal, and understanding that it was done shortly after the assassination. Do you think the portrayal of his administration in those 3 years stands up? Do you think the history reflects accurately of what the administration, his tenure was like?
For accuracy, absolutely yes. It'll probably become seen differently, because everyone is always looking for the bad stuff. Always. I mean, that's just, I don't know what it's become, but it's, I guess, human nature. You mention a president, and immediately someone will think of something negative or that sounds negative. I can certainly say with accuracy that President Kennedy was a tremendous diplomat for the United States of America. People around the world loved him. I've been in tents in villages where there's a picture of him next to the Virgin Mary, hanging on what you could call a tent wall. The love of him was just magnificent. I went to the premieres around the world in '64, the latter part of 1964, after it was done. And my God, if you had the $50 with President Kennedy's image on it, it was like giving someone a bar of gold. That'll probably be forgotten. I hope it isn't forgotten, because he just was, as I say, in terms of a diplomat for the United States, his very presence was just magnificent.
Lastly, if someone is watching this film for the first time, particularly young people, what would you say is the most important message to come out of it?
What he meant to the world. That is the most important message. What a terrible tragedy it was. Remains in anyone's mind who was alive at that time, and that he did a great deal of good for the United States. And the end credit, right after the picture, I put only one end credit, presented by the United States of America. And I meant that because we're talking not about a movie, but we're talking about a man.
Bruce Herschensohn is a senior fellow professor at Pepperdine University in Malibu, California, and the writer, director, and music composer of the film John F. Kennedy, Years of Lightning, Day of Drums. Thanks for being with us. And now here's the entire 85-minute film.